Hey, everybody, this is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author, and I'm excited to welcome Marcia Clark to the podcast. She's a best-selling author of gripping legal thrillers, as well as her acclaimed memoir, Without a Doubt, which chronicled, of course, her time as the lead prosecutor during the O.J. Simpson trial. And her latest book, Trial by Ambush, set to release on December 1st, is a powerful true account of a sensationalized crime from the 1950s that sheds light on the dangers of media distortion and systemic injustice. Just finished it. It was a fantastic read. Welcome to the show, Marcia.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here.
I've really enjoyed this book. I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of Barbara Graham before, so it was very interesting to read this and see the parallels. Even though this happened 70 years ago, it's kind of weird.
Isn't it crazy? I thought so too. I mean, it's really this was not a case that I actually thought I was going to write about. I hadn't heard of it either, Alan. But then I was researching another case and it was like in a footnote. It would just happen to be mentioned. I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. The case involving Barbara Graham, another woman charged with murder, and that in itself is, of course, unusual. And then I got more and more into it and realized, oh my God, it was a huge case. It was its own trial of the century back in the 50s. And that was interesting, but it was also kind of off-putting because I thought, well, if it was such a big trial of the century, everybody's already written about it, and I'm not going to go try out on that trodden ground myself. So I was like, at first, kind of turning away from it. And then I thought, it's a little bit intriguing. Let me look. And it turned out that no one had really written about the trial. People had written a little bit here, a little bit there about the case. And there was one very slim book that was devoted to the case itself, but it did not focus on the trial. Plus, it seemed to have been written by a reporter who had a very biased view of the case. And it turned out he was a collaborator with the prosecution. So, uh-oh. And then, and there was one book that was really terrific that was but it was only a piece of it. Proof of Guilt by Kathleen Cairns, I have to say, was wonderful, but her focus was on the death penalty, not on the trial. So nothing had really been written that was focused on the trial. I thought, if there's something here, I should find out. That started me on the road to doing all the research and finding out just how hard it is to research a case that is over 70 years old. That was I don't think I'm going to do that again. Of course, I say that, and of course, in the next book will be exactly that. But
Yeah, that was fascinating reading your research. Way at the beginning, you were like trying to find the court transcripts, and you actually went downtown to Los Angeles, your old stomping grounds. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I'm just kind of curious, since you left the DA's office, has it been a while since you've been in that area? Was it weird? What was that process like?
well, yeah, what was really weird to me was that in all the time all the 14 years I had been working in that office downtown Los Angeles on Temple Street, I never knew that the archives were actually right behind my building, subterranean and below ground. And it was wild when I thought I was trying to find the sources. Where do I find material on this case? That the beginning of the trail was right there in my backyard, kind of. And it's a wild place, Alan. It really is. It's this cavernous place. You go underground and it's huge and packed floor to ceiling. And the ceilings are so high of all these cases, all case files. But these are recent case files. I remembered because I recognized them from my days. They're color coded and everything. And I thought, okay, those are not the case files from Barbara's day. They're way too recent. So I was getting a little nervous. Had a wonderful guy who helped me, and he came over and I said, I'm looking for all the transcripts, everything you can get me on Barbara Graham's case. And it was 1953. And he's go, oh boy, I don't know. And I saw him go over to talk to a group of guys, older men, sitting probably on break. And they were all sitting at a table together. And I saw him, talking to them, asking them. And I saw them all kind of shake their heads and go, oh, and I'm like, oh no, the trail is ended before it began. Came back and he said, okay, I'm not sure, but it might be on microfiche. Go take a break and I'll text you when I found out. So I went and walked around, getting nervous, looking around, and kind of remembering also having an old home week, oh, that's my building, and that's where my office was on the 18th floor, and all that. And they had turned the parking lot that was right behind the building. That was the coveted parking lot. That was the place to park, that you had to get seniority to have the permission to park there, because otherwise we were walking like half a mile to the parking lot in Chinatown, which was, kind of dangerous. And so now that parking lot behind the building has been turned into a park, which is much prettier, but also made me wonder, so where does everybody who works there park? Anyway, thank goodness I had things to distract me. And so when he texted, said, I'm ready, I went back and he said, it's on microfiche. And I was like elated.
Wow.
And I said, can you tell what you've got? Do you know if it's trial testimony? Because that's what I was looking for. I was looking for the reporter's transcript, which is what happens in court. He said, I don't think it's that. But what it was, ultimately, I came back the next day and it was a stack like this, about 1,000 pages.
Oh, wow.
And it turned out to be the clerk's transcript. So that is not the testimony. The clerk's transcript has all of the minute orders and motions filed and that kind of thing, official documents. I was depressed at that point because that's not going to be enough to write this book. It's not what I want. But so that led me on the crucible to finding out, where did we find the reporter's transcripts? And then discovered that it was, yes, we still have them because they keep them forever if it's a death penalty case, but they're in the state archives. And that's where my researcher, John Valeri, was a gift from heaven, because he had to chase them down and keep pushing and pushing to get them, because they kept saying, we have to legally vet them and make sure we can let these go out. And I kept saying, tell them these are public documents. Transcripts of trials are public. We're entitled to this. This is not something. And finally they did. So it turned out when those boxes were delivered, I still wasn't sure what they had. All I could really ask them to do is give me what you've got. Give me everything you've got on this case. And I was so nervous when I opened that box, like, if this is it, this decides whether or not I get to write this book. And I saw volume 1 reporter's transcript, and it was like, yes.
After all that.
After all that, then I saw that there were over 4,000 pages of reporter's transcript. That's what I said.
So between both documents, like over 5,000 pages that you had to go through?
Easily over 5,000 pages, over.
Wow.
But the clerk's transcript wound up giving me little nuggets of gold that you'll see in the book, and I get to refer to them. Incredibly important subpoenas and stuff like that. I kept finding these little nuggets all over the place. Walter Wanger, a Hollywood producer, the one who did the film I Want to Live, that was based on Barbara Graham's case, right? Susan Hayward won an Oscar for Best Actress for portraying Barbara Graham. And he had a treasure trove of stuff. And he archived everything he had regarding the case as he was producing the film. So he had letters from Barbara, a bunch of them. He had a very critical report written by her investigator that came on board to help her after she was convicted, that turned out to have an amazing amount of critical information that had never been written about before or acknowledged. And also the original statement of the accomplice, who was the star witness that no one had seen before. So this book has a lot of stuff that certainly the jury never saw and that has never been written about before.
Wow. And the only reason they kept it was because it was capital murder case. If not, what do? They just get rid of all that information? Oh, right.
Yeah. What happens is the reporter's transcripts are kept usually for 10 years for average cases. They keep them longer if it's life without. The only cases that are kept forever are death penalty cases.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of curious too now, like, even before you started on this journey and everything, what initially drew you to Barbara Graham's story, and why do you think it was like, I want to write this now? What was the catalyst for that?
Yeah, it was a slow dawning thing. It wasn't like a eureka moment, I kept reading and kept going through like everything I could get my hands on by myself, while I was waiting for the transcripts to arrive. So newspapers.com became my best friend. And I got to read about the trial as told by the reporters, not the most reliable sources for everything, but certainly gave me a flavor of what the trial was about. certainly it also gave me the feeling for the attitude towards Barbara, which was shocking. I have to say, and I think that was part of the reason that got me very interested and motivated to want to write about this story, because they vilified her from day one. This was a woman who came up rough, no question about it. She was abandoned and neglected from birth, but she was never a violent criminal. She was kind of your typical person who, of no means, poverty was her life. She had no skills, particularly because she never really went to school or never got past the eighth grade. And even up until the eighth grade, it was a spotty thing. Yet she was very smart. But that was very tough for her. She had no skills that were saleable in a legit market. So she wound up in bad company frequently, wound up being a dice girl, which is basically a shill for these illegal gambling places. And she had been busted for possession of marijuana, for prostitution, that kind of shoplifting, bad checks, but all that kind of fringy misdemeanor stuff. Never violent crime. And here she was in the middle of their trial of the century for the murder of this innocent woman in her 60s, Mabel Monahan, living in this nice little house in this quiet little neighborhood in suburban Burbank, California. And she became the sensation that they were writing about from morning, noon, and night. I mean, they focused on Barbara almost exclusively, but in the worst way possible, because she was beautiful. They went after her looks, and they spared no adjective in describing her hair, her makeup, her clothes, the way she walked, every breath she took, every time she yawned, every move she made. They were all over it, describing it, but always through a lens of, this is a villainous, stone cold, cold-hearted, vicious. They called her Bloody Babs, and they put her at the center, calling her like the mastermind, when she was nothing more than meant to be a lure to get the older woman, the victim, to open the door. So seeing that, the way she got framed up as being the key player when she was anything but that, was fascinating to me. And I thought, I got to tell about this. I got to talk about this. But in order to do that, I have to know what happened in this trial. And that's why it became such a big deal to get my hands on the reporter's transcripts.
And so when you started going through all those transcripts, did you, even at that time, did you already knew right away you were going to write about it, or do you still have to go through it to really make your mind up? I don't know what your thought process is on that.
That's a good question. I knew I was invested. I already had a feeling by the time I had the reporter's transcripts. I had read enough other things to have some idea that I think there's a book here. I think there really is. But it did take me a long time to be sure of that. And it was about, I think it was by the time I was about 100, 200 pages into the transcripts, I realized, oh yeah, this is happening. And it was a combination, I think, of things that I had already read. I had read the newspapers. I had read the one very slim book that had been written by the reporter. I had read what Kathleen Cairns wrote. And by then I had Walter Wanger's archive. So there was enough there that I just had to get a feeling for the players in the actual trial. And then I knew for sure. And she had a wonderful lawyer, which was that I did not expect to see. I had read some things that made it seem that her lawyers were kind of not really dialed in, because defense attorneys who were representing, they were appointed by the court because the defendant could not afford to pay a lawyer. But in today's world, the state will pay. The state pays the county pays for the lawyer that represents the indigent defendant. They didn't back then. Back then, when the court appointed a defense attorney to represent someone who couldn't pay, they did it for free. Now, that's one thing if the case takes a week. But when you have a case like this, a death penalty case, that's not only a murder case, but like at the trial of the century, it's going to take months. You can go down the drain. You really literally have no income because you have no time to do anything but work on that case. Nevertheless, her lawyers worked very hard. I mean, they really went all out for her, and they did an amazing job. They were very dedicated, and they worked very hard. She She got lucky with that. She certainly did. But, unlucky to have a prosecution that saw her as the get in the whole business and went after her in a way that even a federal judge said was unseemly.
Hmm. That's so fascinating about the public defenders back then. So there wasn't like a public defender's office. Were they forced to do this for free, or how did that work?
They were. They
Wow.
were. When the court taps you and says you'll do this case, I don't know how they get out of it. I don't know that they do get out of
It's
it.
like jury
And
duty.
yeah, the ultimate irony. That'd be great. I can't try this case. I'm on jury duty.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating to read too. Do you think, I mean, had this been three guys, this probably would have like it would have even been a big deal. I mean, I hate to say it
You
like
know what?
that, but
You're so right. No, it wouldn't have been. It really wouldn't. That's what kind of contributed to this being such a big case, is when you have the situation that is so bizarre and unusual, and having a woman be the center of a violent murder case like this. And it's not a murder where it's somebody she knew. You murder your loved ones, they're
Mhm.
not so loved. But that's something that is much more familiar, right?
Mhm.
Killing between people who know each other is a more common thing. Killing someone, an innocent victim like Mabel Monahan, is quite another thing. This is not a woman who she, as a victim, was not somebody who was a part of the crime world. So that in itself is shocking. And then to have a beautiful woman as the defendant is shocking, and had it been just the two guys, and those two thugs look like exactly what they
Mhm.
were. Talk about Beauty and the Beast. Emmett Perkins and Jack Santo looked like the murderers they were. And I think it probably would not have been a big sensation had it been just them. But with her in the middle, she's the jewel in the crown.
Yeah. And what do you think? So just curious, I know this is kind of like but I mean, looking at it in today's world, same three people, what do you think, how do you think that would have played out nowadays compared to 70 years ago?
Yeah, I think it would have played out differently. Number one thing is, especially in California, I will speak because this was a California case, it was a Los Angeles case.
Mhm.
Um, I think it would have played out very differently because we have a different view of the felony murder rule. So, for those of you who want to nerd out with me, I will explain. The felony murder rule, which probably exists in every state in some form, is that when you are participating in a certain kind of felony, violent felony, and burglary and robbery are two of them, if a murder occurs in the course of committing that felony, then you're on the hook for murder, whether you meant to do it or not, whether you actually did it or not. And even if it was accidental, you're on the hook for murder. Nowadays in California, we are refining culpability for that murder. So if you're not the actual killer, we look at what your participation in the felony really was. And if you only had a limited role, for example, getaway driver, that kind of thing, or lookout, that kind of thing, then it's much more likely that you will be punished for committing the felony, but not the murder. So it would have been a very different story for her in today's world, I think. And for sure, she would not have been put to death.
Wow. And would they try to have had her like testify against them, and that would might have helped her too, or is that not off the table when it's murder?
Well, it isn't off the table, but the problem that happened, this is so interesting to me, and this is part of her psyche. Her friends were everything to her because her family was nothing. Her mother threw her out and abandoned her when she was born. So she had no family to really fall back on, and the friends that she made were not the most savory. Emmett Perkins was a friend of hers. He's her co-defendant. Jack Santo was somebody she met more recently, but she really followed the code of you don't snitch on your fellow travelers.
Mhm.
And so when she got busted, along with Santo and Perkins, she refused to talk on pain of anything. They threatened her, they pushed her around, they tried to get her to talk. She wouldn't talk. But another person involved in this case, in the murder, John True, as I call him, the ironically named John
Yeah.
True, because he was a big liar, he eventually did turn. And so he was the one who became their star witness. Now, once they had John True as their star witness, they really couldn't turn anybody else because it makes it, who are you going to, you can't turn everybody. I mean, you
Mhm.
wind up basically with everybody having an immunity deal, you have to go with the man that brought you, so to speak. And John True, once he agreed to testify for the state, that was going to be their star. And Barbara, even if she had changed her mind, which seems unlikely, at that point, they couldn't change horses.
Wow, So that was sad to read. Reading all that, the seems like everybody was like a use her and abuse her like through her whole life. It's just kind of a sad for her, of course. But
Yeah.
yeah. I was also wondering now. So what do you see the parallels now? Because now we have Court TV and all these true crime podcasts. But back then, this was like very unusual, right? To like for the public to find out about these things and these trials and these type of murders is very unusual, right? Back then.
You know what? I wonder if that's true.
Oh,
And here's why. Here's why I wonder about it. I don't know for sure. Um, because I think we've always been fascinated by true crime.
yeah.
I think that people have always been fascinated by murder most foul. In part because it is the most, there's no crime greater than that. It is life and death. The stakes are so high. The victim has lost his life. All of the surviving people who knew and loved the victim suffer. The defendant is on trial for his or her life. It doesn't get any more high stakes than that. And then on top of it all, you have a puzzle. Did he really do it? Did she really do it? What really happened and how it happened? There's so many questions, and people get kind of get addicted to the puzzle of it all, and they get fascinated by why and how everyone got brought to these extremes there where someone actually died. I mean, that is in itself a puzzle, a conundrum, and something that people seem to always gravitate towards. So I bet they did, but they didn't have the outlets that we have today. Today we have podcasts, and we have television, and we have films, and we have books, and we have Substacks, and there's so many places to find out about true crime. But I'm sure that people were looking for it as much as they could find it. I'm sure they definitely had books being written about it back then. The newspapers were definitely going after it, as you saw in Barbara's case, nonstop. In fact, I do a lot of quoting from the headlines and all the stories that were written about Barbara's case nonstop. So I have to believe it was happening on other cases as well, not just hers.
Yeah, that was interesting too. They talk about journalism now, but they were very aggressive back then. Like the sensational, the way it was like a tabloid kind of a reporting of her case.
It really was. And that was the most shocking thing to me, because in today's world, yeah, you're going to have some newspapers that give that tabloid spin to things and sensationalize everything. Of course you will. But you're also going to have some sober analysis. You're going to have dissenting voices. You're going to have some that are going to say, hey, I don't really know that the prosecution's case is all that, and pick out what's wrong with it. But back then, all of the papers, whether they were kind of tabloid type papers or the more respectable papers, like the outlets like San Francisco Examiner, Los Angeles Times, they all fell in lockstep with one another, talking about the villainous Barbara and the obvious hero that John True was, which was just nonsense. But they all seemed to, they just kind of all went in the same direction, no dissenting voices at all. And it didn't really occur to anyone that the story John True was telling was ridiculous, which when I started looking at it, when I was reading his testimony, I said, are you kidding me? And then no one really voiced a contrary opinion until at the very end. Ed Montgomery, a reporter for San Francisco Examiner, who had been writing all these vilifying stories about Barbara, finally came to the courtroom in Los Angeles and watched the trial and got a feeling about Barbara vis-a-vis as opposed to the other two defendants, and said, I don't know that we've been doing this right. I don't know that we are coming to the right conclusions here. And he was very eloquent, actually, when he ultimately, after the trial, wrote about his epiphany and the change of heart that he had in realizing that they'd all gone down this primrose path of just chasing her down, going after her hammer and tong, and realizing that he had done wrong, that he had viewed the case through an improper lens, through an unfair lens, and everyone else had too. So he actually became her champion and chased down all that he could to find ways to get her conviction overturned and to get her clemency. And he was the one who actually interfaced with Walter Wanger
Mhm.
for the film I Want to Live.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So it seems like he had he was feeling remorseful about the original coverage. At least one person was.
At least one was, yes. There was another one too, Alan. Bernice Friedman, who also, who did she write for? I think she wrote for the Chronicle, and she routinely would interview death penalty inmates in San Quentin. And so she wrote a book about all of the inmates that she had spoken to, including Barbara. And her chapter on Barbara was fascinating because she went and decided to dig too. She was another one that she admitted she was all in for Barbara's guilty and she deserves the death penalty. And then she actually met Barbara and a number of times, and then decided to go and meet John True. And her revelations about what she saw were fascinating. And she too had a change of heart.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and there was a picture I saw on your website, or I can't remember if this or was from the book, but it was Barbara, and I don't know, between the journalists and the court people, it was all men. That was very striking. I mean, that especially back in the 50s, it was, I mean, completely male dominated world that you had to go through, huh?
It really was, yeah. I mean, I think they probably had a matron with her in the courtroom or at various times, but otherwise it was all men. It was all men all the time. And that picture really got to me. I think
Yeah.
that picture was ultimately, I think, the final uh, the final tipping point for me when I decided I have to write about this. And she's sitting there next to her lawyer in this prison dress, and all of the reporters are gathered around her and hovering over her in a way that, I mean, you can feel the intensity of the moment. And she's looking over her shoulder, and you can see she's scared, she's nervous, she's not this monstrous villainess that they've painted at all. It's a very compelling photograph, and it says so much.
Yeah, yeah. There really is what is it? A photograph says 1,000 words or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
picture's worth 1,000 words. That one sure
yeah.
is.
And you know, I know you experienced this when you were with that whole O.J. Simpson, the trial of the century. Is that something that you kind of like? I mean, you're the prosecutor, of course, so it's very, very different. But that intensity, I mean, you were just doing your job, and all of a sudden, like everybody was on you, what you were wearing, all that stuff. So you kind of bonded a little bit with Barbara on that retrospect of it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it was one of
Yeah.
those things I didn't want to actually bring Simpson into it. But at the
Yeah.
same time, how can I not acknowledge the elephant in the room? And
Yeah.
so, I mean, you can't
Uh,
really avoid the parallels. And so, yeah, I mean, certainly as the woman, a woman was not a very common thing to see as a lead prosecutor in a trial of that magnitude, even though actually, there were so many female DAs that were handling big cases back then. Menendez, I mean, there were so many. Um, it just happened that this was the big trial at the time,
mhm.
and so they focused on me, but not like with Barbara. But I felt the heat too. Certainly getting dissected for the way I looked, hair, makeup, dress, everything. It all felt so stupid to me. I really didn't
I can
understand
imagine.
you know but in terms of the intensity and the pressure in the courtroom, because of all that attention, not just me, everyone felt it. And at one time, it was really funny because I got so used to it, I didn't think about it anymore. That case went on for so long. And a friend of mine, a defense attorney, came in to the courtroom and stopped by to see me. And he goes, "Oh my God, it's like a pressure cooker in here. I don't know how you deal with that." And I hadn't thought of it in so long. You get used to these things. And I thought, it is kind of intense in here.
Well, yeah, I remember just watching it on TV back then. I was, and just all the even like the courthouse, the trial, it just seemed like there's so many people there. It was just jam packed. Like I don't know how many people were in there, but it was crazy.
It was packed. It was really standing room only just about every day of the trial.
Yeah.
And you could see that was the case in Barbara's case too. I was looking through newspaper clippings, and it showed all the spectators lined up in the hallway waiting to get in because there are much fewer seating than there were people who wanted to watch. So they had a packed courtroom as well all the time. And it's just, amazing to see.
Yeah. Yeah, because those courtrooms really aren't that big. I've only been a couple times for jury duty, but I couldn't believe it when I was in there. I'm like, this is so small.
I know, right? I think, what's funny? I think television really distorts our
Yeah,
expectations when it comes to courtrooms, right? Because they show them to be kind of grand or at
yeah, like
least
Law and Order.
spacious. Yeah,
That's what I was
exactly.
expecting.
I know. And I got to tell you, even I was surprised because I really did believe that back in the day, back in the 50s anyway, that they had, those very grand high ceiling courtrooms with the fan going. And remember all that? And the judge sits way up high. And I was really thinking that that's what I was going to see in the pictures of the courtroom that Barbara was tried in. Nope. It was as boring as it could be. It was just like it reminded me of the courtroom that we had in the Simpson case with just newer chairs. I mean, really boring, ugly government issue stuff. It's not,
Yeah. Yeah, it's
yeah,
not like
not what you expect.
yeah, not like To Kill a Mockingbird, where they like so that's what
Yeah,
you're explaining. That's what the big pe
exactly.
people sitting up in the aisles and the
Yeah,
second floor.
exactly.
Uh,
Exactly.
uh,
Oh, I don't know. Those days are gone. And, it's been a
yeah.
long time since we've had courtrooms like that. Too bad, because honestly, I do think if our courtrooms had a little more majesty, it would help jurors deal with the tedium of having to sit through these trials. At least then you feel the importance of what you're doing. Whereas
Mhm.
I think we kind of feel like we're in an elementary school classroom.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
has the opposite.
Elbow to elbow with the fellow juror potential people.
Exactly.
Uh, how long did Barbara's trial last?
Um, it was a month and a half, which for
Okay.
them was a long time. And but they went full long days and there was no days off. So when we say 5 days a week, it was 5 days a week and from like 9 to 5,
Oh
really every
wow.
day. And they moved very quickly through their
Hmm.
trial. We do a lot more ruminating on pretrial motions and objections. And the judge in Barbara's case he was very smart. There were times I definitely took issue with his rulings, as you'll see, but as one does anyway. But I got to
Yeah.
say, but they moved quickly, and so when the lawyers objected, he ruled from the bench. They didn't do sidebars, not much.
Hmm.
Once they did sidebars, just once, and that was at a time when the ambush happened in the case, and the lawyers ran to sidebar and asked to be relieved, and that's its whole other that's a whole big other bombshell. There were so many in that case.
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing. I don't want to. I mean, it's all like you said. It's all public records, and it's a true crime. But reading it is like, and I think that's because of your skill. It's writing. You've written so many fictional legal thrillers that you made it like a real thrilling read, even though it was a real court case. I don't want to give too much away for the reader.
Thank you. I'm so glad, Alan. I felt that way reading the transcripts as I'm going, oh my God, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah,
Crazy.
and what is your like, the writing process to grab 5,000 pages? I mean, do you like outline? How does that work compared to writing a fiction notebook?
Yeah, no kidding. So I gave myself chapter breaks, just like I do for fiction.
Mhm.
When I write fiction, I do chapter breakdown. So chapter one, this happens, a line, maybe a paragraph. Chapter two, same thing, so that I have an arc in my mind. Now I deviate from it constantly,
Yeah.
I mean, but I have at least the map in my mind, and if I decide to go somewhere else, I adjust. I kind of did that here too. And yet it was easier than I thought it was going to be because it does lay out logically. You have the investigation, you have the murder itself. You have the investigation, and that in itself was so fascinating. How the murder got planned, how the investigation went. There were twists and turns in that too, as they wound up basically kidnapping one of the defendants under cover of darkness, which was amazing. And then you have the trial, you have the grand jury, and that was a little more difficult to arrange because I didn't want to repeat testimony. So I wanted to acknowledge there was a grand jury proceeding, this testimony was given, and then go straight into the trial. So that took a little massaging. as well as the things that were going on behind the scenes during the trial that no one knew were happening until it got sprung in court.
Mhm.
The ambush was sprung. So it was, in that sense, I think a little easier than doing fiction because the story was already there.
Mhm. Yeah, I just try to get like the hook, that ambush hook, for the reader, and going from there, kind of like that was your angle, like, oh, I got it.
Yeah, well, it got me actually.
Hmm.
Because the case unfolded the way it did, the trial unfolded the way it did. Um, it was naturally pretty dramatic. I didn't have to add anything, and I didn't expect to either. I didn't want to. I mean, this is a true story. So I did quote rather liberally from what people were saying in court. And, their cross-examination of Barbara, for example, line for line. This is what really happened, guys. This is not me making it up. Because there is such a thing as, I'm sure you know, true crime books that do invent dialogue, just to smooth things through and show you what happened in a more palatable way rather than just, you know, saying, well, he went to her house and they decided this. Well, it's a little more interesting if you put the dialogue in. He went to her house and he said, so what do you think? Should we go?
Yeah.
That's fine. I didn't do that. I didn't do that because I didn't have to, because I had the trial transcripts. You could see what everybody was saying.
Mhm.
And then I had their closing argument and I had what they had actually said. So that was a gift. If I write another true crime book, I think I would want to again study the trial, because for me that is the big draw. How
Mhm.
did it happen? How did they get convicted? Especially in a case like this where you have a woman who has nothing like this violent crime in her background and a victim who was as innocent as they can get. How did this happen? How did the conviction happen? And why were all the players involved the way they were? You don't know that unless you have the trial transcripts.
Do you think that the difference between writing, like, because without a doubt, that was, you were there. Was that a big difference between that and writing? Here, you're more like a third party in Trial by Ambush.
Yes, it was much more pleasant to be the third
That's what I would
party.
think. You have to bring up bad memories.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very painful writing without a doubt. And I did not have to do it myself. I had a wonderful collaborator, Teresa Carpenter, who was a brilliant writer. And I could not have done it myself. I think I was just too shredded. I was an emotional wreck. And yet there was a real need to sit down and write while I still remembered everything that happened, while my memory was fresh. And yet the memory was very painful. So, and of course, I don't know that I could have figured out how to organize it, the way she did. So what would happen is she would say, here's the arc. And as I told you, I mean, that's how I learned, that's who I learned it from. Chapter this is going to be this, chapter two is going to be this, and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So she would have me write what I could remember of each topic for each chapter, including any dialogue that I wanted to throw in. So I would do that, and then she would go over it. She would fix it. Let me just tell you, it was, the old fable about Rumpelstiltskin
Yeah.
spinning straw into gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what it was like. I would send her straw, and she would send back gold, and it was a master class in learning how to write and watching how a brilliant person really
Mhm.
does it. It's quite a thing to watch and to learn
Yeah.
from, and that helped me deal with the awful crucible
Mhm.
of having to relive the trial, was to be able to um, watch someone do the writing process,
Yeah.
this process of creating really great prose. That was really a special experience. But yeah, I much preferred the experience of writing Trial by Ambush by a lot.
I can imagine. And
Yeah.
what was the segue to writing those legal thrillers, the fiction? Did that come about later, way later on, or I can't remember because your legal thrillers are
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you so much. That's so kind of you. Yeah, I had wanted to write a novel, and crime fiction in particular, since I was a kid. I was
Okay.
addicted to Nancy Drew.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Hardy
Yes,
Boys.
Hardy Boys. I read them too. Love them too.
Uh,
Nancy Drew, I always think of because did you ever? I don't know. Did you ever read her, Nancy Drew, or just Hardy Boys?
no, I read Dusty Drew too. Yeah.
we
Yep.
all
Yeah.
we crossed over. Did you ever notice that Nancy Drew, in every chapter, she showers and changes? She showered and changed. She showered and changed. And it drove me crazy. When I was a kid reading it going, how many showers does this girl take? She also has a lot of clothes because she changed every time. Anyway, and her father always went out of town, and that's when things went crazy.
Yes, the same thing with the Hardy Boys. They're always by themselves, the 10-year-old kids or whatever they were.
Exactly, right? So fun.
Yeah.
So I always wanted to. It was one of those dreams. I can't really do this. But after working with Teresa on Without a Doubt, that's when I really thought, gosh, I'd really like to go after that dream. And so I told Teresa, so, okay, now let's write fiction. And she said, no, now you go write fiction.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay. I did not do it. Not for a few years. It was a crisis of confidence. I thought,
Yeah.
I don't know if I could pull this off. And then I decided, oh man, YOLO, give it a shot.
Yeah.
So I did. And I started with Rachel Knight. And,
Yeah.
it was a joy. It's a lot of work, as you know,
Mhm.
but it's really fun.
And do you have any plans for another fiction book or nonfiction? What are you working on now? Can you give us a little sneak peek?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not entirely sure. It's funny. I am looking around for another true crime story
Mhm.
because I think I really enjoyed doing this one. And if I could find a crime that was interesting to me, in other words, that was very important to me in selecting the case because you have to be really invested in it to work as hard and for as long as you do on these cases. And it took the better part of 2 years. So, if you're not really invested in the case, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And I really wanted something that had more depth to it. I did not want to go for the monster in the closet, the lurid tales of blood and gore and slasher stuff. I don't care about serial killers. I've done enough, handled those cases as a prosecutor, read enough of those books. I'm over it. What I want is a crime that gives us an opportunity to look at something more important, deeper, psychologically, socially, legally, of course, but something that illuminates our understanding of our world, our legal world, and the people in it, and the why of the crime and the why of the verdict.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating now because we are looking at older cases like this with today's lens and things. You really look at things different. I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling how
It's different,
society
and yet it's
changes.
this, right? It's different, and yet there's so many things that are the same.
Hmm.
You prosecutors, I want to make really clear, most prosecutors are in the courtroom doing the right thing and being fair about what they do. Most prosecutors do not hide the ball. Most prosecutors do not look for ways to get a defendant convicted or put to death when they shouldn't. So I want everyone who reads this to know this is an unusual situation. It does need to be called out, but it's not so unusual that it doesn't happen today. It does. And we've seen these cases where a prosecutor goes too far, hides the discovery, hides the evidence, or say the exculpatory evidence, that kind of thing. And when a defendant's right to a fair trial is violated that way, our justice system suffers. So I think it is important to recognize that this is not just a historical lesson. This is something that we need to guard against now as well.
Yeah. All right, Marcia, before I let you go, I have to ask you because, it's in the news now again and all these Netflix shows, of course, the Menendez brothers.
Yeah.
What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? And the governor just now said he's going to wait for the new DA. What do you think about
Yeah.
that? What do you think the chances are of getting out?
Good question. I don't know. I didn't handle that case, or
Hmm.
I don't have an inside line on that case. I know what you know.
Hmm.
I do know that there was a big difference between the two trials. In the first trial, the jury hung on both defendants, and they had put in all of the evidence of abuse from teachers, friends, family, coaches, everybody. The second trial, they limited that testimony quite a bit, and that resulted in a conviction. Now, I don't think that's the only reason there was a conviction. I think that there was a public exhaustion with the notion that a defendant can get away with murder by claiming with what they call it, the abuse excuse.
Hmm.
And it's really not the abuse excuse. I mean, their defense was really that they believed they were going to be killed by their father, and that it was imminent. and that's what we call imperfect self-defense, because it was not a reasonable belief in the need for self-defense. It was an unreasonable but genuinely held belief. That was the defense that they put forward due to the abuse that they'd suffered for years, and to more recent things that happened with their father. So all I can say about this is there are a number of defendants who killed no one and are serving life without the possibility of parole, like the Menendez brothers. And so if they get paroled now, I have a few things to ask the governor.
The can of worm, right?
Yeah. If you're going to let those guys go, I have a few names on the list that you should add.
Yeah. And those murders were very brutal. It wasn't, I mean,
Yeah. It was shocking, wasn't it? Did you
Yeah.
watch the Ryan Murphy miniseries?
I haven't yet. I kind of was, like Menendez Brothers has been covered so much, but now everyone keeps talking about it, so I'm gonna have to go watch it. But I was like,
Yeah, now you're stuck.
yeah, now I'm getting that FOMO.
Yeah, that's what always happens. Everybody starts talking, then we got to go back and see
Yeah, at first,
what the
like,
shouting was.
yeah, at first I'm like, nah, and then I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna watch it.
Yeah, I know. I do that all the time.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I remember how brutal it was, because back in the day when it was being covered, I was still in the DA's office. And I remembered thinking, oh my God, they went and reloaded to finish killing their mother.
And with the shotguns, which is very
Shotguns, yeah, horrible, really brutal crime. So we'll see what happens. My guess, if I were betting, my money would be on the fact that this DA does not go along with the program and does not say they should be released now. And maybe because of the kind of thing that I'm saying, and I'm sure other defense attorneys are saying, I've got clients who really didn't kill anyone. How about them? If you're going to get these guys were firing shotguns. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. What do you think?
I think after what happened with the recall and all that, probably not. I would imagine like it's going to let it stand. So, and I don't know I don't know anything about that, but I mean, like that crime was pretty brutal. So, I mean, I know
It really was.
I know 35 years is a long time, but like you said, there's people done less and are in there for longer. So, and look at what happened to Barbara. I mean, that's kind of, I mean,
oof.
what she did.
When you look at the story more, dispassionately, you take a step back and you look at what she could have done, as opposed to what John True said she did do. And I actually reenacted the crime myself based on his testimony to try and test it to see if it's possible she could have done what he said. It's not even possible, physically not possible. So, well, we'll let readers decide for themselves, I guess.
Yep, the book's out December 1st. It's already on first reads and everything. In case when this comes out, it'll be out on December 1st, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you so much, Alan.
All right, thank you, Marcia.
You take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.